Hi there, welcome back to Branded. I'm Sarah, and today I want to talk about something that almost never makes it into any business content. Not because it isn't real, but because it doesn't perform well. It doesn't get shared, it doesn't generate the kind of engagement that keeps people posting it. It doesn't have a lesson attached that makes the difficulty feel worthwhile. It's just what it is. The unglamorous reality of running a real business over an extended period of time. And I want to talk about it because I think it's the most honest conversation I can have with you right now. And I think if you've been building your business for a while, some part of you has been waiting for someone to talk about this without immediately pivoting to the silver lining of it all. So today, there's no silver lining. It's just the thing itself. So there is content that gets made about the building process, right? The lessons, the breakthroughs, the hard periods that turn into growth, the moments of doubt that become clarity, the struggles that, with enough distance, become your story. And then there's the experience of building that business that never becomes content, not because it's too personal or too valuable and too vulnerable because it doesn't have a specific shape, because it doesn't really resolve into anything. It's just the flat, ongoing, sometimes heavy reality of doing something every day that you chose and keep choosing. And it still costs you, right? On all the days, even when the cost doesn't produce something visible in return. The invoice that needs to go out, the platform that changed something and now you have to relearn it, the email that requires more than you thought it would, the decision that needs to be made again, even though you thought you'd made it already, the thing on the list that keeps moving to tomorrow, not because you're procrastinating, but because you genuinely just don't have what it takes today to give it the attention it deserves. None of that stuff becomes content. It just gets done, or it gets moved, or it sits there in this sort of low level awareness that something needs addressing, and today just isn't the day. And the absence of that content creates a specific kind of distortion. The version of business ownership that exists in public spaces is curated, not because people are lying, but because the unglamorous parts don't lend themselves to a great Instagram feed. So, what circulates are the peak moments, the lessons, the transformations, the revenue milestones, the breakthroughs. And the person building something real in real time compares the inside of her business to everyone else's outside, wondering why it feels heavier than it looks for everyone else. There's a part of the business conversation that I think gets underrepresented: boredom. Stick with me here. Not the boredom of having nothing to do, the specific boredom of maintaining something you already built, of doing something for the 15th time, of showing up for a version of the work that no longer challenges you the way it did when you were first figuring it all out, of producing content, delivering work, having conversations, running processes that are all entirely competent and fine and have stopped generating the feeling they used to generate for you. This boredom is hard to say out loud because it sounds like you're ungrateful or something. You built something people pay for. You have clients, you have a business that functions, and somewhere in the middle of a random Tuesday, you realize you're kind of bored by it. Not all of it, and not enough to walk away, just enough that the work that used to feel energizing now feels more like maintenance. And the boredom doesn't have a clean solution. It's not a sign you need, a new offer or to pivot or a full rebrand. Sometimes it's just the reality of doing something real long enough that the novelty of it has worn off. And what's left is the actual work, stripped of the excitement and the new. The business content space doesn't have much room for this because the solution for boredom is usually to build something new, launch something, pivot, find the next exciting thing. And sometimes that's the right move. But sometimes the boredom is just the cost of doing something consistently over a long period of time. And the answer isn't always a new offer. It's just continuing, which is unglamorous in a way that doesn't make for a compelling post. There's another aspect to the business conversation that's also very unglamorous: doubt. But the doubt that never becomes clarity. The business content version of doubt always has a resolution, right? You doubted yourself, you kept going, you came out on the other side with a lesson and a stronger sense of direction. The doubt was a cocoon, and the clarity was the butterfly. So the story has a shape. But there's another kind of doubt that doesn't take shape. The doubt that just sort of sits there, that isn't attached to a specific decision or even a specific fear. It shows up on ordinary days when nothing is particularly wrong and everything is technically fine. And something underneath it all just quietly asks whether this is right, whether this is the thing, whether you're doing it correctly, whether the decision you've been, you know, decisions and directions you've been heading in are the ones you'd choose again with everything you know now. That doubt doesn't resolve on a timeline. It doesn't have a lesson waiting at the end of it. It's just there, present and recurring. Something you've gotten practiced at carrying around rather than something you've learned to resolve. And because it doesn't resolve into content, it doesn't become content. So it stays private. And because it stays private, you might assume you're the only one because you don't see anyone else talking about it. And the absence of it from the public conversation creates the impression that everyone else has figured something out that you're still working on. They haven't. This doubt is extremely common. It just doesn't make good content, so it doesn't get talked about. And on top of all of that, there are parts of building a business that happen alone. And I'm not even sure that there's like a specific word for it. Some of what you do happens without an audience, without recognition, such as the hour you spent figuring out something technical that was standing between you and moving forward, the email you wrote and then maybe rewrote 3 more times before you got it right, the decision that you made carefully and thoughtfully that nobody will ever know how much it took from you to get to that decision. The problem you solved quietly without it becoming a moment anyone else could witness. Building something real over time involves an enormous amount of these things. Work that is genuinely necessary and genuinely cost you something and never gets seen by anyone. Work that you don't do because it'll be recognized, but because the business requires it and you're the one running the business. And there's something interesting about the sustained experience of doing important, necessary, costly work that nobody witnesses. Something that's hard to name, but it accumulates. It's a kind of invisible weight, not resentment or burnout, just the weight of carrying something significant, mostly on your own, without an audience to witness the difficulty and continuing to choose it anyway. The content that exists about the experience of building a business tends to make this sense of loneliness make sense through like a lens of inspiration. You're doing hard things alone, and that means you're strong and committed, and it will be worth it. And maybe that's true, but it's also just hard. And the hard doesn't always come with a corresponding feeling of strength. Sometimes it's just hard, quiet, without an audience, without a lesson, without a bow. And I'm not trying to make the unglamorous parts of building a business sound worse than they are. And I'm not trying to discourage anyone or perform a kind of like fake honesty that looks like pessimism, wearing authenticity as a mask or something. What I'm trying to do is close the distance between what the public atmosphere of building a business portrays and the private reality of it. Not because closing that distance will make the unglamorous parts any easier, but because I think there's something costly about carrying the unglamorous parts alone, while the only available mirror is a public conversation that has completely edited them out. When you're the only one who knows how heavy something is, you tend to assume there's something wrong with you for finding it so heavy, that everyone else is handling it better, that the people whose businesses look lighter from the outside are actually having a lighter experience on the inside. Maybe you're doing something wrong. Most of the time, you're not doing anything wrong. You're doing something real. And real things are heavy in ways that don't always get lighter with experience and strategy or the right mindset. Sometimes they're just heavy and you carry them anyway because you chose this and you keep choosing it. And the choosing is its own kind of answer to that doubt that doesn't turn into clarity. That's not a silver lining, that's just the truth. And the truth without the silver lining is something you deserve to hear someone say out loud. Share this with a founder who needs to hear that the unglamorous parts of building a business are real and very common, and not a sign that something is wrong with her or the business she's building. Maybe this will help her see it differently. I'll see you next week for a brand new episode. Bye, you guys.